Okay. Yeah, so it's really a pleasure and an honor to be here today, and I'm happy to present you some of our work about central train immunity. And when we are talking about central train immunity, we are talking actually about immune function of hematopoietic stem cell, which is would appear quite weird for some pure immunologists, but I guess I hope I will convince you that indeed hematopoietic stem cell can have true immune function. Okay. So in the lab, we have a long going interest into hematopoietic development. I will switch on my pointer, yes. In particular, from hematopoietic stem cell in the past, go from hematopoietic stem cell to the macrophages, so the myelomonocytic lineage. And the question we ask are related to how this pathway is controlled, mainly starting from the hematopoietic stem cell at the level of the molecular mechanism. Actually, hematopoietic stem cells are known to be the cells that replenish the mature immune cells as they can be depleted by infection or aging or whatever. And for instance, in case of infection, those myeloid cells, such as macrophages, dendritic cells, etc., can die, and they need to be replenished very quickly. And this is the way the differentiation from hematopoietic stem cell is pulled to produce more mature cells. Nevertheless, there are now more and more evidence that hematopoietic stem cell can also be pushed to differentiate. They can be pushed by PAMP or by pro-inflammatory cytokine. But until very recently, there were no formal demonstrations that this push can occur at the level of the most immature hematopoietic stem cell that we call long-term hematopoietic stem cell. And so far, the molecular mechanisms were still unknown, and this is exactly where our work stands. Earlier in the lab, I will not detail those discoveries. We have demonstrated that MCSF, which is a myeloid-specific cytokine and used in the late phase of differentiation of macrophages, can also push long-term hematopoietic stem cell to undergo myeloid differentiation via a specific receptor. And we ask first if this can be used for therapeutic application. We went to see the clinician and to discuss with the clinician to see if MCSF can be used for any kind of pathology where we need to push the production of myeloid cells. And quite quickly, they told us that yes, indeed, hematopoietic stem cell transplantation could be a good target for such therapy. And you may know that hematopoietic stem cell is one of the most oldest graft transplantation therapy, and still more than 50,000 patients can benefit of this therapy. Nevertheless, this is a very dangerous therapy because there is a major mortality of the patient receiving this therapy. And half of the patients who die after this therapy, it's due to the severe leukopenia that they have after the transplantation. So to see if MCSF can help to boost myeloid production and help to fight the infection during this phase and to maybe reduce this phase of severe leukopenia, we did set up a preclinical model in the mouse that recapitulates exactly what is done in human transplantation. So we did transplant hematopoietic stem and progenitor cell into radiated recipient. And what we did, we inject MCSF 3 times at the time of transplantation, 6 hours later and 18 hours later. We let recover the mice for 1 week. And 1 week is the time where the leukopenia is the deepest. And when this occur, we come with an infection with a live pathogen, and we analyze the survival of the mice after this acute infection. We first tested the three most annoying pathogens in the clinic, which are a bacteria, Pseudomonas, a virus CMV, and a fungus Aspergillus. I show you here the result of the MCSF treatment during the transplantation against Pseudomonas infection. On this survival curve, I think it's pretty clear that you can see that if the recipient has received MCSF at the time of transplantation, they do recover better, and they do support better the infection if they have been treated with MCSF first. This was correlated indeed as expected with a decrease in the bacterial load in lung, in spleen, in heart, and in liver. So we can see a decrease of bacterial load in survival of MCSF-treated transplanted mice. And as expected also, this was correlated with an increase in the number of myeloid cells in the spleen at day 9, at the day of where we infect a few days after infection with Pseudomonas. So increase in granulocyte, in phagocyte. And this goes also as expected with early myeloid commitment of the hematopoietic stem and progenitor cells that we can follow here with the reporter model that I will explain in detail a bit later. But this model, we can see the early commitment of the hematopoietic stem cell and the multipotent progenitor via the GFP expression, and this is quantified here, where you can see increase in commitment. So MCSF induce early and rapid induction of myeloid commitment of hematopoietic stem and progenitor cells, and production of mature myeloid cells that leads to protection of the recipient to infection. So this is for bacteria. We have now also demonstrated that MCSF treatment upon transplantation of hematopoietic stem cell can help to protect the recipient from the fungus, Aspergillus. And more surprising, it also protects against MCMV infection. It's a bit surprising because macrophage myeloid cells are not that much involved in viral protection, but we have demonstrated now that it is a different mechanism involving NK cells. And if you want to see the data, this is in the last publication of the lab. So it's pretty clear that MCSF and boosting the hematopoietic stem cell at the higher level can help during the transplantation to fight further infection, because it decreases the period of severe leukopenia. What we want to do now is to go to human for this. So we are on the way to set up clinical trial. Actually, we are looking for money to produce human MCSF at the clinical grade. This is not easy, but as soon as we can do that, we are ready with our clinician, your partner in the clinic, to do that. And this is a collaboration between indeed the CRTD and the CML. So MCSF can push long-term hematopoietic stem cell to undergo myeloid differentiation, and this helps to fight infection. But MCSF is probably not the only cytokines that can do the job. There are several other receptors for cytokine at the surface of the long-term hematopoietic stem cell, and the commitment and the push to myeloid differentiation has been demonstrated by other labs, in particular for IL-1 beta or TNF alpha. Long-term hematopoietic stem cell do also express toll-like receptor, and stimulation of those receptors has also been demonstrated to push the hematopoietic stem cell to produce myeloid cells. There is another very interesting receptor at the surface of long-term hematopoietic stem cell, which is CD150 or SLAMF1. This is a very interesting receptor because first, it is known at the for long-term hematopoietic stem cell, it is known actually to be the best marker for isolation of long-term hematopoietic stem cell. But its function in long-term hematopoietic stem cells so far was totally unknown, but also unexplored. What pushed us to explore the function of CD150 on long-term hematopoietic stem cell is several results that were obtained in other innate cells. This receptor is known to be an entry receptor for the measles virus, and it is also known to be a bacterial sensor on macrophage and dendritic cells for Escherichia coli or Brucella. And in the CML, next door, there is a very famous team led by Jean-Pierre Gorvel, who is a specialist in host pathogen interaction. And actually, in Jean-Pierre Gorvel labs, they have previously identified the ligand for CD150 at the surface of the bacteria Brucella. And this ligand for CD150 is a membrane protein called OMP25. So those tools that Jean-Pierre Gorvel labs could provide us, we asked the question if actually long-term hematopoietic stem cell could recognize, sense a live pathogen, in that case Brucella, via this interaction between OMP25 and CD150. And we asked if this recognition of live bacteria can push stem cell to undergo myeloid differentiation. To do so, we use, I will show you only key experiment for each question. So here is an experiment we did in vitro with using Pu1 knock-in GFP hematopoietic stem cells. Those stem cells come from this reporter mice where the GFP is integrated in the Pu1 gene. Pu1 is a gene coding for a transcription factor, a famous transcription factor, which is a master regulator for the myeloid differentiation. And it has been demonstrated by us and others that it is expressed very early when the hematopoietic stem cell is induced to commit to the myeloid lineage. So it's a very good marker for the very initial commitment of the hematopoietic stem cell toward the myeloid lineage. So what we did, we FACS sort highly purified, highly pure, Pu1 negative hematopoietic stem cell, meaning uncommitted stem cell, that we put in ex vivo in medium, and we stimulate them with different kind of membrane extract from Brucella, either wild type or deleted for OMP25, for instance. Then we FACS analyze the GFP, so Pu1 expression in those stimulated hematopoietic stem cell to quantify the early commitment. And what we could see is that, as expected, Brucella wild type membrane extract could induce quite good commitment of the hematopoietic stem cells. This commitment was not that good if we remove OMP25 from the membrane of the bacteria. This commitment is also blocked if we use blocking peptides that interfere between the CD150 and OMP25. And this commitment is also blocked if we remove CD150 from the surface of hematopoietic stem cells. So early myeloid commitment of hematopoietic stem cell is induced in vitro by Brucella. The stem cell can sense directly the bacteria via a CD150 OMP25 direct interaction. This is in vitro. What is it the case in vivo too? So to test this, we again use the Pu1 knock-in GFP reporter mice, but in that case, we even cross further those mice on CD150 knockout mice. So we have Pu1 knock-in GFP mice, reporter mice, either on CD150 wild type or knockout background. And we injected live Brucella wild type bacteria or Brucella bacteria without OMP25 protein at the surface. 48 hours after, we, as previously FACS, analyze the hematopoietic stem cell in the mice and look for GFP expression, which is a readout for early commitment of the hematopoietic stem cell. This is how it looks in the positive control when we push the mice, the cells with MCSF. And this is a quantification we get with stimulation with Brucella. As previously in vitro and as expected, we can see a nice commitment of hematopoietic stem cells in response to Brucella wild type in the case of presence of CD150. This is killed by removing OMP25 from the surface of Brucella. And this is also completely killed if we remove CD150 from the surface of hematopoietic stem cells. So here again, in vivo, this time, early myeloid commitment is induced by Brucella, and this goes via direct an interaction between CD150 and OMP25. It is important to note that early commitment of hematopoietic stem cell induced by recognition of Brucella does not imply infection of hematopoietic stem cells. As you can see on those immunofluorescence staining, actually, hematopoietic stem cells are not affected by Brucella that are here in pink. The Brucella is an intracellular pathogen, and it has to enter into the cells to do the replication. This occurs in GMP and in other myeloid mature cells in the bone marrow, but not in hematopoietic stem cell. So really, what we think is that the early commitment that is induced by Brucella is really done by a touch and go mechanism. There is no infection of the hematopoietic stem cell by Brucella. So what does this early detection, this detection of bacteria induce, and does this induce myeloid commitment and a functional myeloid commitment? To address this question, we do some in vivo experiment where we quantify the myeloid commitment, downstream myeloid production of myeloid progenitor in vivo in mice that are mixed chimera, where we have actually replaced the host hematopoietic system by a mix of wild type and CD150 knockout bone marrow cells. Those mixed chimera where we have in the same recipient both wild type and CD150 knockout, we have infected them with Brucella wild type or deleted for OMP25, and 8 days after infection, we have looked to myeloid differentiation in bone marrow by FACS. And here we have quantified the ratio between myeloid and lymphoid progenitor, and you can see that we have, as previously, an increase in the myeloid progenitor in response to Brucella wild type. This increase in myeloid progenitor is not present if we remove OMP25 from the bacteria, and this commitment, this increased production of myeloid progenitor is also not present in the case of CD150 knockout hematopoietic stem cells. So definitively, Brucella induce hematopoietic stem cell early myeloid commitment. This is CD150 OMP25 interaction dependent. And this is also associated with an increase in myeloid cells in the blood that I do not have time to show. So we have been able to demonstrate here that not only cytokine or POMP can induce push long-term hematopoietic stem cell to undergo myeloid differentiation, but hematopoietic stem cell can also sense and recognize live pathogen through CD150, and this is the case for Brucella that is recognized by via the OMP25 membrane protein. So now we have demonstrated the function for CD150 in the hematopoietic stem cell. CD150 is a bacterial sensor also in hematopoietic stem cell as it is in dendritic cells or macrophages. So we already have a picture of several immune function, classical immune function that are now allocated to hematopoietic stem cells. There is one big immune function that is really important also is to check is what if the hematopoietic stem cell could also have immune memory? And this was a very provocative and challenging question to ask. And Bérangère de Laval in the lab had the courage to take this question. And what she did first is to check if there is a functional immune memory in vivo before to go further. So what she did to see if there is indeed immune memory at the level of the hematopoietic stem cell, she used the same preclinical transplantation model that I showed you previously. So transplantation of hematopoietic stem cell into irradiated recipient. 1 week later, infection with Pseudomonas, and look at survival curve. And the tricks here was to use as donor cells hematopoietic stem cell coming from a donor mice that were pre-stimulated or not with LPS. And you can see here in the survival curve that the mice that have been transplanted with LPS pre-stimulated hematopoietic stem cell do survive better to the second infection with a live pathogen. So this was a clear demonstration that the hematopoietic stem cell could indeed keep a memory of the previous signal and respond better to the second infection, so the second stimulation. So after we demonstrate that the memory exists in hematopoietic stem cells, the question was, what are the molecular mechanisms for that? Obviously, we thought that it could not be the classical immunological memory, such as in T cells and B cells with VDG recombination and expression of antibodies. So far, hematopoietic stem cells have never been demonstrated to express antibody or any of the gene responsible for this kind of memory. So obviously, we thought about the more recent demonstrated memory, the trained immunity or innate memory. This innate memory has been demonstrated first in dendritic and dendritic cells and macrophages. Now it has been demonstrated also in adaptive cells, but this memory was a good candidate for hematopoietic stem cells. And what is interesting is that this memory, the molecular basis for this memory is actually epigenetic reprogramming. So we look at the chromatin change in the change in the chromatin landscape in hematopoietic stem cell upon LPS stimulation, and we look at that by ATAC-seq. So what we did is that we stimulate or not LPS with LPS mice. And 4 weeks after the stimulation, we FACS sort hematopoietic stem cell. And we look by ATAC-seq at the global change in the chromatin to look if there was some epigenetic reprogramming. So quickly, maybe what is ATAC-seq? ATAC-seq is a technique where we can look at, we can quantify the open chromatin thanks to the use of the specific transposase, which will cut the open DNA, the DNA that is not protected by nucleosome. And then we can purify and sequence all those pieces of cut DNA that we can align on the genome. This alignment will produce a peak that we call the ATAC-seq peak. And we can analyze this globally at the scale of the genome. And then you can see here in red some peak, some opening of some position where the chromatin is open, and in blue, some position where the chromatin is closed, this open upon LPS stimulation. So what we saw 4 weeks after LPS stimulation in the mice by ATAC-seq is that indeed there were many changes in the chromatin landscape that were still there 4 weeks after the stimulation. And if we look, for instance, at the position in the genome that are open after LPS pre-stimulation, and if we do gene ontology on the genes that are associated to those positions, we can find terms such as immune response, immune effector process, leukocyte-mediated immunity, regulation of inflammatory response, etc. So clearly, LPS can induce epigenetic change in the chromatin of the hematopoietic stem cells, and the peak that are increased are linked to myeloid immune response and myeloid-specific gene. After we have demonstrated that there is an epigenetic reprogramming in hematopoietic stem cell, then we look if there was another hallmark of train immunity, I mean enhanced train response. After the first stimulation, there is a response, but in the train immunity, the second response will be of a higher amplitude and maybe quicker. So this is the typical train response for train immunity. So we look at this train response, and this we look at again at the global scale by gene expression in RNA-seq. So first, I will show you what are the changes in gene expression after LPS injection 1 day, after 1 day after LPS injection, or 4 weeks after LPS injection. The global result of the RNA-seq is presented here in those EMA plots. So 1 day after LPS, you can see that there are many changes in the transcriptional landscape, with many genes that are overexpressed and many genes that are downregulated also. All this, however, is back to normal 4 weeks after LPS injection. And I recall you in ATAC-seq at 4 weeks after LPS injection, there are still many changes in the chromatin landscape. So those changes in chromatin landscape are not translated into change in transcription. At transcriptional level, everything is back to normal at 4 weeks. So what happens if we give a second shoot of LPS after this first stimulation? Do we have an enhanced response? Actually, yes, we do have an enhanced response. This is a result of the global expression of gene after the second LPS, so 4 weeks after the first one. And you can see that we have more genes that are overexpressed, approximately 4-fold more genes, and we also have more genes that are downregulated. So definitively, the second response is higher, is increased compared to the response to the first injection. So we clearly have a train response. If we look a little bit more carefully to the genes that are up and down regulated after the second LPS, we can find, as expected, some gene linked to the myeloid differentiation and immune response. And what was also very reassuring and interesting is that we also see gene involved in mTOR signaling, fatty acid metabolism, and oxidative phosphorylation. All those are hallmark of train immunity in macrophages and dendritic cells. So it seems that hematopoietic stem cell not only mount a train immune memory, but is using the same kind of memory as we know for dendritic cell and macrophages. We then had to check that this change in transcription after the second stimulation was indeed leading to functional change and production of more myeloid cells. In vivo, so to demonstrate this functionally, we use again our famous transplantation preclinical assay. And we transplanted again LPS pre-stimulated stem cell into a recipient, wait 1 week, and then second stimulation with viable live bacteria. And then we analyze, we quantify the number of myeloid progenitor, which are the GMP. And we can demonstrate that indeed, in the mice that have been transplanted with stem cell pre-stimulated with LPS, we have indeed an increase in the myeloid progenitor after the second infection. So LPS pre-stimulated hematopoietic stem cell increase the myeloid production in response to infection. We finally dig a little bit more into the molecular mechanism. What could be the, and we had a specific focus on transcription factors. So we try to look for transcription factors that could be responsible for the imprinting of the memory in the hematopoietic stem cells. So for this, we actually look at transcription factor, which show binding sites in the peak that are in the open chromatin after the LPS, and in parallel, which expression is also increased in response to LPS in hematopoietic stem cells. So among the candidates, we had transcription factor from the AIDS family, such as PU1, AP1 family, or ATF, IRF, or CBP family. And among those, one was particularly interesting is CBP beta. Why it is interesting? Because CBP beta is known to be at the top of an assembly hierarchy and present in the majority of LPS responsive and enhancer dendritic cells. So it is known to be a pioneer factor for chromatin remodeling also. Whereas AP1, ATF, IRF, they are known to come in a second time on a second layer of regulation. So CBP beta was a good candidate to be a transcription factor involved in the control of imprinting of immune memory in hematopoietic stem cell. So to check if it was a good candidate, we actually used knockout of CBP beta. And what we did actually, again, we use mixed chimera where we replace the host hematopoietic system of the recipient by a mixture of CBP wild type and knockout bone marrow cells. So in the same mouse, we have at the same time wild type and CBP beta knockout cells. So we stimulate those chimera with LPS. 4 weeks later, we factored the hematopoietic stem cell, either wild type or knockout, and we did ATAC-seq as we did previously to demonstrate the global change in the chromatin landscape. In the wild type cells, we can recapitulate and show again the change that we saw previously in response to LPS with some peak, with some positions that are open and some positions that are closed. But all those open and closed position peaks disappear actually almost all in the CBP knockout cells. And this is an aggregation plot where you can see the quantification of these. In the CBP knockout, there is actually no change in the chromatin landscape. And this is, we have checked this, it is without losing the general LPS response per se. So the CBP knockout cells are still able to respond to LPS. We can see that with other readouts, but they are unable to imprint the memory, global change in the chromatin. So to conclude, I think that we can have now this model at the level of the hematopoietic stem cells. The naive stem cell can produce a balanced level of all the immune cells. In case of stimulation, for instance, with LPS, there will be expression of CBP beta that will mark and open chromatin at certain position, which are mainly containing myeloid gene. And those genes, the chromatin around those genes stay open for at least 12 weeks. This is what we have tested. And this opening of the chromatin, maintenance of opening of the chromatin, allow, in case of a second stimulation, to have a quicker and an answer with a higher amplitude, with better production of myeloid cells that help to fight the infection. So I think I hope I have convinced you that hematopoietic stem cell can be indeed now a major actor of the immune response, and it's not only at the top of the hierarchy, it's in the central part of the immune response. We can have stimulation by cytokine, by pump, etc., even with live pathogen. And all this increase the production of myeloid cells to better fight infection. And it has also immune memory that can be kept for a long time and reuse later. This could have some potential innovative therapeutic application, both in terms of stem cell transplantation and in terms of vaccination. So we can imagine to use those properties of central immunomodulation and central train immunity for clinical application. With that, I would like to finish by thanking the people involved in the work. This is the work done in Michel Ziveke lab, mainly by our patient Kandala for all the MCSF protection of by MCSF for transplantation, and Bérangère de Laval for both CD150 and memory story, with the help of bioinformatician Julien Mauricio. And in the lab of Jean-Pierre Gorvel, Lisiana Isenage was involved in the experiment with Brucella for CD150 and Brucella interaction. With this, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take the question.
Thanks a lot, Sandrine, for your great and clear presentation. So please do not hesitate to write your question in the chat, and we will try to ask all these questions to Sandrine. So there are questions already. The first one is about the timing and the duration of the effect induced by LPS, but I think you mentioned it, that you had the chance to test up to 12 weeks. Do you see maybe a reduction of the LPS-induced effect between 12 weeks and 4 weeks? What do you think? How long does it last?
So yes, indeed, we test only 4 weeks and 12 weeks. So we did not test longer time points. So we don't know longer, but what we see at 12 weeks is that the memory, the change in the chromatin landscape are still there. And the response is still there. So quantification, it's difficult to compare 4 weeks and 12 weeks, but at least globally the chromatin change are still there. So
and they are stable between 4 weeks and 12 weeks.
Yeah, exactly.
Another question is about pathways that need to be stimulated. Your first part was about Brucella and SLAM, and the other part with LPS and Toll-like receptor 4. So the question is, do you think that the effects are similar in terms of epigenetic modifications? And actually, I had a similar question. Do you need both stimulation? Or let's say SLAM stimulation and maybe MCSF receptor stimulation, and everything synergize as is integrated? What do you think? And do you need then the vaccine or the pathogen to be in the bone marrow, or they can sense actually indirectly the pathogen from the inflammation?
Okay, so I think there are 2 questions in your question. So I will start by the end. Indeed, the pathogen, in the case of Brucella, we have the demonstration that indeed the pathogen is in the bone marrow. This is known from clinical data in human, for instance, that the pathogen can, in patients that are affected with chronic infection with Brucella, they have problem in bone and joint and so on. So it's known that the pathogen can be there. And in the mouse, we have demonstrated that Actually, the lab of Jean-Pierre Gorvel has demonstrated that by transplanting bone marrow cells from affected mice to new recipients, they do transfer the bacteria also. So it's clear that the bacteria is in the bone marrow. Yeah. That said, we also know that the hematopoietic stem cells, some of them can circulate in the blood, they can regularly. So it's not excluded, but we don't know that they also can detect pathogen in the blood or in other sites in the body. Why not? This is not excluded. Then for the first part of the question, so do we need several signals, and is there be a synergy between different signals? This is a pretty good question, and we don't know if we have to synergize, if we need to synergize all this. These are things that we are doing at the moment. It's a work of Bérangère de Laval in the lab and with Luca Rufinato. They are looking at actually the cross reactivity also, and if we can induce the memory with one signal, for instance LPS, and then re-stimulate with something else, for instance poly-IC or Zimosan or whatever, and if this will increase the memory, the response, or erased the response also, we don't know. What we know, what Bérangère did in her study, at least, is that she has pre-stimulated the donor mice with different stimuli, not only LPS. She did also LTA, which is a component from a gram-positive bacteria, poly-IC to mimic a virus, and poly-IC. So she did that only once with one dose of each, so maybe it's need also to be evaluated, but in that experiment, she could demonstrate that poly-IC was working also well to protect as well as LPS pre-stimulation, but not LTA, for instance. So maybe LTA, we have to put more or less, we don't know. But like this, it seems that there are different responses depending on the pre-stimulation, the nature of the pre-stimulation. So this is also work ongoing in the lab by Bérangère and Luca to try to screen a little bit what are the pre-stimulation or the first stimulation signals that will give the best memory, or which kind of memory it gives, if there is some commune core chromatin regions that are modified, and if there is some commune genes leading to the memory, and if there are some difference, what are those differences in the chromatin and in the genes that are expressed?
Yeah, actually, one question is about the accessible region of the chromatin. Florian, the next speaker, has also seen AP1 being more accessible, or being in the open region of chromatin in his monocytes after vaccination. So he's asking, what are your thoughts about the role of AP1 in innate memory in relation with your transcription factor, CEBP?
Yeah. So definitely P1 would be a very interesting candidate also to test. The point is that to test if P1 is involved in the imprinting of the memory, we would have to use P1 knockout cells, and we know already that the P1 knockout cell will not be able to differentiate actually. So it's difficult to. It was difficult to test this easily. I mean, with only knockout, but definitively, probably all this. It's not only one transcription factor that does the job, and as it has been demonstrated in dendritic cell in macrophages, all this is probably temporally regulated with different layers of transcription factors that will come to really imprint in the chromatin the position that has to be kept open or closed. So I have no data to answer the question. It's not easy to do with transcription factors that are so much important for the differentiation by itself. So we have not tested that, but probably it's not only one, and it's a combination of several at different time also.
Yeah, actually, I believe that's a key question to understand what is the interplay between the differentiation program and the training program,
Yes.
and there are some overlaps.
Definitively, yes.
Another question by Jean-Daniel relates to your work with SLAM and Brucella. You mentioned that SLAM CD 150 is also important for measles virus and vaccine, actually. And so Jean-Daniel asked whether measles vaccine can reach bone marrow. And in clinical trial, actually, there is no increase of myeloid cells post injection of the vaccine. So maybe it is key to detect the vaccine in the periphery, but maybe not in the bone marrow by HSC.
All those are very good questions, and that we would love to address. So we can address that in the mouse. We did not yet, and in human, actually, we are not linked to clinician and so on. So yeah, these are very good questions, but I did not dare so far to try to make a connection with the clinician and so on to address this. I should admit. I'm sorry.
Always hard to do everything. So George Hazard also congratulates you for your talk, and he has a question again about CD 150, or at least the comparison between your two studies with Brucella and LPS. So his question is, are HSC responding directly to LPS, or are they being conditioned by a cytokine innate inflammatory environment? So
yes.
Again, is it direct sensing or sensing inflammation in a way? Is it a memory of inflammation?
Yeah. So part of it is direct for sure. We have done, Béranger has done that with TLR4 knockouts bone marrow cells. So exactly the same way we did for CBP knockout. We use TLR4 knockout cells that we had in chimeric mice to stimulate with LPS and ataxic. And in ataxic, we can see that it kills completely also the change in the chromatin landscape. So part of it is indeed directly linked to TLR4 expression. This does not exclude that there are also other indirect effects via other receptor and other cytokine or other coming from or contact with other cells in the niche. But at least,